Another really cool thing that you've done in this field, and we got to use it during paramedic school, and I've seen the videos. I'm not gonna lie, I do have some pros and cons to them, but I think they're beneficial. I always learn something from them. The real emergencies, REEL. You can find them on the YouTubes. There's a whole setup for them. But Dr. Antevy, if you want to tell the people what they are, what you do with them, I think they're super cool. I used the heck out of them in paramedic school because it got to a point where night watch wasn't cutting it, and I needed to see real real life calls outside of the ones I was going on just to nitpick and whatever. So, what you got, my
Yeah.
guy? Tell me about real emergencies.
So real emergency came out of an idea that I had once I saw. I have a friend named David Spiro, pediatric ER doc out of Oregon, great guy, and he started a company called Real DX, REEL DX, and the real obviously is because he had videos of all different sorts of patients, non EMS for the most part, and he started a company where he would sell this to medical schools, and the medical students would watch the video of a real patient, and then they would go through the case, and then they'd watch the next segment of the video, and then it would take them through this whole thing. And I said, wait a minute, that's a great idea. I said, did anyone have EMS videos? And at the time, another friend of mine, his name is Dr. Mark Peel. He created this thing called the Life Flow, which is that it's basically a rapid infuser. We use it in our hospitals, use it for whole blood and EMS. Anyway, he said, "Wait a minute! I know this agency in Texas who has body cam video, and they get releases from the patients, and they're allowing me to use their video, and they have thousands of hours of video." I'm like, "Holy cow!" So the three of us got together, and we said, "Okay, let's bring in Zach Dunlap, who's a critical care paramedic who was working for them at the time." So the four of us said, "All right, we're going to look at these videos, and we're going to just find incredible cases, and we're going to just do an hour webinar on them." And when you look at the videos, it's like you're right there, and it's people have been shot. It's people who have um, brain bleed. It's kids having seizures. It's end of life care, and you're right there. And guy got hit by a bike. The most recent one we did was um, uh, CPR induced consciousness, where you're pushing on someone's chest and they wake up and they're talking while you're doing CPR. And so the first instinct is to stop doing CPR, and then they die again because it was the CPR that was keeping them alive. So it's when you see the video, you'll never forget it. And then when you're on the scene the next time around, you can kind of mentally say, wait a minute, I know what I'm supposed to do here. I got to sedate this person. In my protocol, for example, we have a CPR induced consciousness protocol where we give 200 of ketamine. And actually, on Sunday, that case on the softball field that we mentioned earlier, that guy was screaming and talking during CPR. So we gave him ketamine. And guess what? The guys were walking out of the hospital here today, 3 days later. So that real emergency series is all predicated on great real video from incredible people out there. And it's been amazing. Like my heart rate is going throughout that webinar, because when you watch the video, even for the 10th time, it's very nerve wracking to see what you all go through en route to a call, on the scene of a call. It's just incredible stuff. So it's been a big blessing, and we never thought it would take off as much as it did, but it has. So we're going to keep doing it.
I just want to make one point. If I had a patient who was conscious during CPR, 100%, I don't know who would be on the chest, myself, my partner, whoever it is, I would immediately be like, hold on, y'all. I don't know what y'all are doing. And as they kept going, I'd be like, all right. I'd be like looking around, like, what TV show is this? This can't be real. Like, what? Excuse me. Especially when we get
Correct.
there and like we have in some of our areas, we have volunteer firefighters who how do I delicately put this? Some are really great. Some I've had them ride in with me. Um, Yesterday, or the day before, I think it was the day before. I had one of them that literally we had a. I don't know if it was self inflicted. I don't know. That's above my pay grade to decide or not, and above my moral judgment. But GSW to the head, and I literally was like, "Oh dear God!" And so I looked around at the firefighters because like somebody's got to ride in with me. My partner's got to drive, and I remember like that moment of relief. I looked at one of them and I was like, "Oh, thank God it's you. Come on, we're gonna go." Um, but when if we were to get there and one of those precious firefighters looked at me and said, "Yeah, we started doing CPR and he started talking." I literally, I really think I would look at him and be like, "Please leave the room. Like, don't do this." Um, but I mean, it's videos that like I learned something new almost every single one of them, and then having like that real time, the pause in between to have, I mean, doctors discuss things and like ER physicians who, like yourself, get it from our viewpoint and our standpoint, who understand and aren't going through and nitpicking everything that the EMS providers do because, like, why did they do it that way? Because they got protocols and training. I don't know what to tell you, my guy. Must be nice to have a team of 10 people to intubate. Never mind. I'm not coming for you, Dr. Antevy. I promise I'm not coming for you. But but it's tough. And then for me, it's just like it's those calls that like you don't get too often, like with our pediatric calls or our trauma
Yeah,
calls, that even though
yeah,
you have the training, they're ever evolving and adapting. And you can't, I mean, you know what to do if when, but also like seeing somebody and just the general viewpoint of these videos, seeing somebody else do it and how they do it and reflecting from their own
yeah.
call so you can adapt it for your future calls, it's huge.
Yes, yes, yes. And I mean, everything you said is when yeah, I agree with, because when you see someone else doing it, you then kind of take that in and you say, okay, am I going to treat that severe anaphylaxis the next time? What order am I going to do things? What are my priorities? Where should I be doing this? Should I be doing this on the scene? Should I be doing this in the back of the ambulance with the ambulance stopped? Should I be doing it with the ambulance en route, in motion? And all those things come into play when you see, especially, the cases we look at are, they're critical. They're not a lift assist, right? Um, and a majority of these calls we're getting from an agency that's so high performing that they do everything right there. And once you realize that, it gives you that confidence that, wait a minute, maybe they are right. Maybe EMS is an entity that can do everything that the hospital can do, and maybe even better. Speaking of whole blood, CXA, where our data now shows, and we just published a paper about a month ago showing that if you give whole blood early, and our whole blood, we're giving it, within 30 minutes, we have a 90% survival for patients who receive the whole blood prior to their cardiac arrest. And if you look at the normal data, what the survival is from penetrating or blunt trauma, um, it's much lower than that. So New Orleans, so in your state, and they're seeing great outcomes. San Antonio is seeing great outcomes, and now I'm on a big push to try and get the rest of the country to start looking at whole blood. It's expensive. It's logistically complicated. But if you're seeing a lot of trauma in your agency, then there's going to be a day where the cost is going to be covered by not the EMS system because it's too expensive for most EMS systems. But it's things like that where once you see it on the real emergency and you realize, oh my God, those are paramedics somewhere in Texas who brought this guy back to life and he walked out of the hospital. That's like the aha moment that you say, I just saw that from my own eyes. I want to do that too. So we're hoping that these episodes continue to inspire others to do great things in EMS.
And on the thing with whole blood, I mean, granted, I don't know how to run an ambulance agency or EMS agency. I don't know how to be a medical director. And to be quite honest, my next step is respiratory therapy. I don't want to. So, it's so hard having to see the logistic standpoint, like you're talking about the expense and having to write the protocols and then the liability of providers who, I don't know, we all have our faults. So I'll just put it that way. So yeah, you're putting your trust in these providers who just,
Absolutely.
yeah. But
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a huge believer in um, doing the research, getting the protocols right, training the right people, doing the QA on the back end to make sure that, like, for example, I'll give you another great thing that we did that a lot of people don't do is DSI, which is delayed sequence induction. So, a lot of people know RSI. It's basically medication assisted intubation, if you want to call it that, MAI. And, you know, our DSI protocol is pretty complicated. And one would look at it and be like, how do we do that? But once you do the work, you do the training, you roll it out the right way, and then you start seeing the outcomes, we're never going back because we have people who would otherwise have just been driven to the hospital faster, drowning in their own fluids, or that trauma patient who has trismus that you have no medications to manage their airway. Now they're aspirating, and they're a 20-something-year-old kid who got into a car accident, and now they're in a vegetative state because why? Because the EMS system didn't want to go through the diligence, the research, the protocol, the training, the rolling it out, the CQI. I mean, if you want to be a high performing EMS system, you take on big things. So we've taken on pediatrics, we've taken on trauma, whole blood. We've really changed stroke, completely changed stroke. Now we're addressing hospital care because we recognize that as good as our care is, if the hospital care isn't any good, so we're now in the process of passing laws. We EMS, we've already passed laws to improve stroke care in hospital. Now we're passing laws to improve post cardiac arrest care in hospital. So EMS, I mean, just listen to this. EMS is helping to pass laws to improve the care that is happening in hospitals. So we're at a point now where if you're at a high functioning EMS system and you have people who are leading the charge, who can inspire the folks who are doing the hard work to actually believe and kind of do those complex maneuvers, we're saving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lives every year. And in the town I'm sitting in now, this is the town of Davie, small town, 100,000 population, where before I got here, we had about 1 to 2 survivors, neurologically normal adult post cardiac arrest survivors every year, 1 to 2 max. Well, I just found out yesterday that this year, 2023, we beat our record. We're at 9, and the year is not even over yet. We have a couple more months to go. So just think of that. We have, and it may not seem like a lot, but it's 5 times more people coming back to life in my little town just because we've improved the system of EMS. If you multiply that times the hundreds of millions of people who live in this country, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of more people who can, you know, watch their kids grow up, go to their kids' wedding, have grandkids again. We started ECMO CPR. So we have a hospital here that will put the cardiac arrest patient on ECMO while we're still coding them, right? And there's a guy named Gary. He's 55 years old. He's an attorney. He would have been dead. This guy's alive today because of the fact that we convinced the hospital to do ECMO CPR, and he's alive today. He came back and visited us, and that's the beauty of EMS, and that's what I'm trying to inspire people to recognize, that it is complicated, but that's okay. We can handle it.
And then, so yeah, it's the training aspect. It's all of that, but it's also so hard from the field aspect of hearing about the finances. And like I brought up yesterday, to one of our supervisors, there was a 15 plus car pileup on this interstate bridge, and there were, I mean, it's an MCI. There's not enough providers for the surmountable amount of people that are, or the amount of people that are involved in that incident. But it's also like, I mean, there were red tags that turned to black tags because we don't have enough people. We don't have enough
Yeah.
access to the people. It was so much. But I told her, one of our supervisors was like, man, how cool would it have been if some of those people needed blood products and they could have been saved if we would have had them once everything, whatever. So it's kind of that thing of like, finances do play an aspect. I get that. I want my paycheck as much as the next person in this field. What little paycheck I'm going to get, I want it. But even if it's one person that's saved, and not just saved, but like with full neuro intact and zero deficits, I feel like a couple of dollars more would be worth it. But I mean,
That's right.
I
That's
don't
right.
know.
So and it is worth it. Now you have to remember, you know, if you look at the adoption curve of anything, it's like an S shape, right? Where in the very beginning, you have a lot of people trying things that are new, and everybody else doesn't want to get involved just yet, right? Then there comes a point, and it's happening now with whole blood, where people see the value. And then, so there's over 100 agencies in this country who are actively doing whole blood today. Remember, there's 20,000 EMS agencies in this country. So I just said we only have over 100. So we're still at the very, very bottom part of that adoption curve. But once the logistics, people feel comfortable with that, once the payment issue gets taken care of, all of a sudden you're going to get into the steep upslope of adoption, right? Until finally everyone's doing it, or most people are doing it. But that's innovation in anything that you do, right? So look at high performance CPR. That started back in 2006. Here we are 17 years later, Alexis, and I guarantee you, it's still not half of the country is doing it the right way, right? So the adoption curve, uh, double sequential defibrillation. So you have a patient who's in refractory VFib. You shock them, you shock them, you shock them. You give them Lido or Amio. They're still in VFib. Since 2017, we've been doing double sequential. We put a second monitor on, and we pushed a button, not exactly at the same time, but very close to each other. We already have 11 saves, 11 saves out of the 40, which is a pretty high number. Those people walked out of the hospital neurologically normal. That paper just got published in 2022. ILCOR just added it to their things to do. Guarantee you, 90% of the country is still not doing it. So there's an adoption problem in EMS, but what I've learned is there are individual people at the agency who kick and scream enough and then enough people are saying, hey, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? That finally the agency says, you know what, we're going to do it. And so, I happen to be involved in agencies where that's become our MO. We are early adopters. We are innovators. Another one, ketamine for seizures, refractory seizures. You give Versed once, you give Versed twice, patient still seizing. What do? Most people just say use diesel fuel. We said no. We looked at all the data. We saw that ketamine is used in the hospital for seizure. We have ketamine. We implemented that in our protocol back in 2018. Okay. We actually presented our data the following, I think 2 years later, with a 91 or 92% success rate. We're now about to publish our big set, which is over 80 patients, which is still a 90+% success rate. And even though that data is out there, And even though ketamine is already on your trucks, people are still going to wait and wait and wait. And the typical adoption model is about 10 years until finally people start to adopt the things that we've been doing for 10 years. So I find it fascinating now that I have this view of the world because I'm involved in many, many things around the country and I see what's going on around the country. It just, it's incredible to me how people just aren't doing the things that are life saving, that are not as complicated as blood, that are not as complicated as DSI. High performance CPR is free. Ketamine for refractory seizures is free because you already have the ketamine on your truck. You just got to do it, right? And you just got to have the leadership. And sometimes it takes a first year paramedic to say, hey, medical director, why aren't we doing that? Here's the data. Here's the literature. Here's a webinar. Here's a YouTube video I saw on it. Present that information to your medical director in a way that looks like you've done the research, you've done the homework, you're trying to make the agency better. And I've seen many individuals be able to make the change in their agency because they've gone about it the right way. So there is a method to getting things done. People just got to do it.
Because nobody ever changed the world, or I mean their own world, from not doing anything. So
Correct.
there's a couple of things that I'm kind of gathering data about. And again, like for me, it's hard because like I'm a newer paramedic. I'm in January, I'll be at 2 years. So like I still kind of am trying to spread my wings in a way, but also like you're talking about with like the get your research, get your data, get your why behind the thing. It's especially if you're passionate about it and like you know it works and you've seen the reasons why it works. It's hard to have these things piled up of like, man, we need to do this. And then with understandable rationale, your medical director being like, yeah, but it's my license on the line, or there's just not enough data. And especially you hear these stories about how it works. And then, there's not there's the unpublished data of like the times it doesn't work and it was really bad. But still, it's those things that we see that it's like, man, if I could do this thing, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I kind of understand well, it's my license on the line if this fails through and it's a protocol, because there are times in the field where like I see something, I'm like, man, I know I've heard this thing that works, but I look and I'm like, if I lose my license, that's my job too. And it's what I like to do. So I'll know, coach. I
I
might
think
sit back.
I think that that's just an excuse, in my opinion. I think that, like, for example, like everyone says, oh, either they say two things. There's no data on that. I'll give you another example of this. This is like the distal femur IO. Okay, the distal femur IO is like that's the only place you should put an IO in a child in cardiac arrest. Period. But for years, everybody was still uses the proximal tibia. So we're going to be publishing our data hopefully in the next 6 months because we have like 150 cases now. But wherever I go around the country, they say, oh, I don't see any data on that. But then when I show them the data on how bad the proximal tibia is, which is, 40% of the time, 40% of the time, it doesn't work. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, I see that. But where's the data on the distal femur? So, yes, there are times where you say you have to go and get the data, but we've done all of that. So there's nothing that we do that's not data driven, number one. But the other thing which you just mentioned is there's a lot of data out there that's garbage. And there's a talk I just gave at EMS World, which is, the five landmark papers that you need to throw out. It's because these are the papers that everyone talks about as to why they're not doing something. But when you look at those papers, they're garbage. As an example, is the paper that says sepsis, that antibiotics for sepsis in EMS doesn't work. And we talked about it earlier already, where of course it didn't work because the patients in your study were not hypotensive. 97% of them had normal blood pressures. only 8% death rate in your sample. Normal death rate for sepsis is 40%. So then we look at our own data. The time to antibiotics is 12 minutes. The time to antibiotics for a hospital was 120 minutes. We have fluids, we have push pressor epi. We're giving that on scene. And now we're following those patients out to see how they did as far as their neuroattack survival. It's things like that that people look at papers that are not good, and then they say, "Oh, it's too complicated, and I don't want to do it," and it inhibits progress. So if you're working in a system where you could always make the excuse of, "Yeah, you know what? There's not enough data," or "I don't want to lose my license." That's weak. But what you're doing is that you're making excuses because one day it's going to be you, your family, your children, your neighbor, someone in your community, and you're going to say, "You know what? I should have done it," and too late by that time. So um, EMS is rapidly evolving, and if you're out there and you're in EMS and you're doing the same old thing, you're doing it wrong. So I hate to say it. So go to the conferences, jump onto these webinars, listen to what other people are doing, look at their data, ask a lot of questions, ask for the protocol, and then just get it done. That's would be my recommendation.
100%. And even like EMS in comparison to in a hospital or even like a doctor's office, you don't go to somebody or, some healthcare system, whatever, that they're still doing things from like 100 years ago and things that like they're outdated. You don't do that. I mean, granted, you call 911, you don't, in some places you do, but you don't always get to choose who shows up. Like, even as you would hope that your doctor who is prescribing these meds or like at the ER, they're doing these things, whatever, you would hope that they're up to date with things that work. So should your agency be with what you're allowing your medics to do and your EMTs and what you're trying to push forward to, like you said, with progress.
Right, and the talk I've been giving recently about the future of EMS. The only problem with all of this, and there are people who are listening to this who are probably rolling their eyes, and they should be for a certain reason. The reason is that the payment model for EMS is broken. We only get paid if we transport people, and the amount of money we get paid. So I'll just tell you about my agencies here. If you're an ALS patient, we bill 800, but we only collect maybe half of that. So how are we going to support the whole blood? How are we going to support, finger thoracostomy and ketamine procedure and all this other fancy ultrasound? How are we going to support all that when we're not solvent, right? The amount of money we collect by no means covers this business that's being run by the government, by our by our cities. It's a losing proposition. So if you happen to be in Palm Beach County, where tax base is very good, Broward County tax base is very good, our medics get paid great, they get great pensions, they get great, bennies, they get everything great. I mean, you talk to the people who work in any of my agencies, they're on top of the moon because we do everything. We have full support by the city commission. We have great outcomes, we have great training. It's amazing, right? But I'm not stupid. You go 2 hours north of me, you go to the middle of the country, you go other places, and they say, there's no way we can do what you're doing because we don't have the money to do it. And I get that. So I don't want to be sitting here thinking that, everyone should be doing what we're doing, but it's because the system is broken. And that's probably above my pay grade, but that surely is something that I'm aware of as to why innovation doesn't continue in EMS. So just that.
And I'm not going to go down my rabbit hole soapbox of why should a necessary ambulance ride cost an arm and a leg when you're about to lose an arm and a leg if you don't get there to the hospital in 15 minutes. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go on a rabbit hole about how insulin. And for my own case, if I didn't have insurance, my epi that I need at very specific strawberry induced and cross contamination times, my epi costs more than someone who can get Narcan over the counter, which I mean, granted, I support that, but whatever. They get that for free, but I have to pay an arm and a leg for epi that if I don't get it
Correct.
in 5 minutes, I will die. So,
Correct.
anyways,
Well, I have a son who's diabetic, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
so
We spend we spend thousands of dollars a month. Thankfully I can afford it, right? But if we couldn't afford it, then what would happen, right? It's upside down, completely upside down. I agree.
hmm. Hmm. So, I I've enjoyed our discussion. Talking about the Antevy method, talking about the real DX in emergencies, and solve the world's issues in the past couple of minutes. But I'm gonna be honest, Dr. Antevy, that's all I got for now. I'm sure as soon as I end this recording, I'll be like, man, I wish I had asked about whatever. But um, do you have any comments, questions, concerns, any advice that you want to pass on from here? Any advice to EMS personnel? My medical director that I might get to listen to this, but that's beside the point. Anything else you want to throw in there?
Sure, yeah, I'll make some final comments. Just so I love your medical director, Chuck Brunel. He's a great friend. He's a great medical director, very engaged. I've done kind of a lot of things with him, especially through COVID, where he was actually helping out in Florida. So he's got some superpower there. Um, but I will say that for everyone listening, EMS is fragmented, and it's even fragmented in how people come into the profession. Whereas some states say you have to only have a certificate, other states say you have to have a degree, and then you have this big battle going on. And you have it where the federal government doesn't even see EMS as an emergency service, and I think all those things combined make it so that EMS is not able to kind of be who it's supposed to be in our community. So I would encourage everyone listening to you know e- even if you don't have a degree today, continue to advance your education. Take classes that will help you become a leader in EMS. Take classes that will help you shape the profession. Get involved in whatever organizations you can. Um, One thing I would advise people to do is um, even if it's something like the EMS on the Hill Day, where you fly to Washington, you walk around the Capitol, and you go visit your congressmen and women, your senators, and you just sit in a room. You don't have to say anything, but you start to understand that there are changes that can be made if you just put your heart and mind to it. And then as you get further in your career and you're 15, 20 years in, or you're like, okay, I've done all the medical stuff. Now I'm going to work towards shaping the profession. If you've done the work and you've gotten your master's degree in fire science or EMS, and now you're the fire chief, or even one day you'll be the city manager or the mayor of your town. I think that people in EMS need to understand that your career now as a 20-year-old something can massively change when you're a 40, 50-year-old something. And that's the beauty of EMS, is that you're a public servant and you can help your community be better. So I would say don't just ride the ambulances, and like on your free time on the weekends, uh, take that extra course, take a leadership class, come to EMS World Expo, come to Eagles Conference, uh, you know, come to NAEMSP, um, and you don't have to do all of that in 1 year, but just slowly but surely make connections. Get on LinkedIn, be involved in the discussion, so that you could continue to every year advance your career successfully. Doing the same thing for the next 20 years, not the thing to do. And I would encourage people to at least try to do that. And that'd be my one thing I would leave people with. And again, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. Those are the places I hang out for the most part. And it was great to talk to you, Alexis. You're doing great work. And I'm happy to come back anytime you want.
I'm gonna hold you to that, my guy. Yeah, no, thank you for getting on here, and especially instilling the idea of be the provider you would want you to respond to. And thank you for your advanced progress in this field and all the things that I'm going to bring to Dr. Burnell. So, no, I appreciate you, my guy. I appreciate all that you've done and your wisdom and all of the things. And with all of that, as I end every single episode, so with that,
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.